In this video we're going to talk about types of research. Now from the outset let me point out that this is a long video. You'll see from the bottom right hand corner there are 137 slides. This makes it a long video, so I recommend that you stop the video from time to time, have a break, make some notes, wind the video forwards and backwards, and pick up on what's been said, and make your own notes off the video, as well as adding to the notes from your researches and from your reading. But I strongly recommend that you stop the video from time to time, relax, and come back to it later. Just make a note of the slide you've got to and return to it later when you're ready. So it is quite a long video, so be prepared. Now let's start. Well, there are different types of research used for different situations. Clearly here we're talking about research related to business, but research could be for many different purposes. To look at the pricing strategy for a product, looking at the different sources of supply for raw materials, looking at different types of technology that's available. It's all a type of research. So there are many different types of research that may be conducted by an organization. Now, a piece of research can include several categories, and these may be grouped as follows. First of all, the type of research. What sort of research is it? Is it research aimed at improving production, improving the position in the market, trying to gain information about the determinants of sale and what determines the purchase decision, and so on. There are different types of research that may be conducted, so it's important to specify and clearly understand what is meant by the type of research. Then look at the method of data collection. It could be by interview, it could be secondary research, going to government publications or trade publications, perhaps published by a Chamber of Commerce or by the Institute of Directors or one of the chartered institutes, the Chartered Institute of Marketing. It could be freely available data that's put out by these institutions to try and help their members and help others who are interested, help researchers. So it could be secondary data, or it could be primary data in the form of interviews, questionnaires, focus groups, different types of research. So what method should be used for data collection? What type of data is being collected? Is it secondary or is it primary? It's important to understand and know the difference between the two. And what's the sources of the data? Where does the data come from? It's not just secondary or primary. It could come from respondents. It could come from people or personnel who work for the organization, perhaps marketing personnel who have expertise in the particular market. It comes from the sales team who are involved firsthand in dealing with the customers. What's the source of the data? Where does it originate? And what's the method for collecting the data? And this could be straightforward. It could be a recorder, a voice recorder, or it could be notes, it could be interviews, it could be video interviews. What is the source of the data? How is the data collected? Is it collected by questionnaire? Is it collected by group sessions? So what's the mechanism, if you like, for collecting the data? Now, the types of research. Well, this looks at the nature of the research, the research inquiry and the outcome of the research. So the type of research looks at the nature of the research. What is the nature of the research? How is this research conducted? And what's the outcome of the research? The type of research conducted falls into three categories: exploratory research, exploring the situation, exploring the market, exploring the opinions of people about the product. It's exploring, it's finding out. It could be descriptive research, talking about the market, describing the characteristics of the market, describing the characteristics of the area in which the market is situated. It could be a pastel analysis, looking at the politics and the economics and the social structure, the technology, looking at all of the different forces that operate within the market. It could be describing these so that the management, let's say if it's commissioned research, the management will then understand the context in which the sales take place. Or it could be causal or explanatory research. Causal research is looking for causes. What links the two things? Why is it when the price was decreased, the price of the product was decreased, why was it the case that no extra sales were achieved? Why was that? It was expected there would be more sales when the price was decreased, but let's say that didn't happen. So what is the causal connection? Why did it happen? It's looking for reasons, it's looking for logical connections. So we have three types of research that we need to investigate: exploratory, descriptive, and causal. Now, exploratory research carried out to explore an issue or a topic of interest. It could be the company wishes to investigate the possibility of opening a new market, or looking at the conditions in a particular market. It's exploratory, it's exploring, it's finding out more. It's useful in identifying a problem or understanding issues involved in a problem. For example, let's say a company is finding it difficult to sell in a particular area. Then why is that the case? Explore the problem, explore the issue, and try and find out, try and find solutions. Why is it happening? It's exploring the situation. It could also be useful in developing a hypothesis for further study into the research. Sometimes when people are going to make a much more detailed research of an issue, they want to explore it first. They want to find out more about it to see if it warrants further investigation or further in-depth investigation. Perhaps it turns out it's quite a simple explanation. So exploratory research is sometimes carried out in advance of more detailed research. So the situation was explored in advance of what was going to happen after. So, for example, research conducted to explore consumer reactions to new product concepts. Now that would be exploring. It's exploring the consumer reaction to a new concept for a product. It's exploring their reaction. Was the reaction favorable, or was it not, or were they indifferent? Were they enthusiastic? What was the response? It's exploring the response to try and feedback this so that decisions can be made which are helpful to the organization in getting its policy right. Now, descriptive research. Well, this is about answering clearly defined research questions. There is let's say a research question. What is the relationship between price and sales in a given area? A descriptive research refers to looking at details related to that question, trying to describe what the situation is. Generally speaking, we say it's the who, what, when, and how, or even where. It's answering those sort of questions. It's providing a context. It's describing the market situation or the particular research area that is under investigation. It's just describing it. It's not doing anything else. It's a description, so that it's fed back into the research considerations, which may then lead to further research, or it may lead to the end of the inquiry, because the description told the decision makers what they want to know. Descriptive research can be to look at a market, look at customer preferences, look at a group of customers or experiences in more detail. It's describing customer experiences, perhaps, or it's describing a group of customers. What are the attributes of the customers? What's their income? What are their jobs? How did they live? What's their lifestyle? What are the cultural influences on the customers? Looking at the various preferences of customers. How have the customers changed over a period of time? And it's describing. It's describing the customers. It's describing the market. It's describing whatever issue was set out as an objective. It describes the selling situation. It describes the technology in the area. It describes whatever was deemed to be important. It's a description. Now, causal or explanatory research. Well, this type of research aims to answer the why questions in research. Why is something linked to something else? Why was it the case that when price was reduced, no extra sales resulted? Why? Why did that happen? So this is more to do with analysis. It's collecting data. It's trying to work out why. Why is something connected to something else? Why is something not connected to something else? It's the why question. Explanatory research identifies problems and offers solutions and conclusions to research questions. It's trying to answer the questions. What are the connections? Why does this group of consumers like the product and that group of consumers not like the product? Why? Find an answer. For example, marketers might conduct research into why customers preferred brand A over brand B. Why is it in a given area that customers prefer brand A? Why do they ignore brand B? Perhaps brand B is cheaper, but yet it's not purchased. Why is that the case? Why? So it's causal or explanatory research that's called into play. The nature of research determines if the research will be continuous research, ad hoc research, in other words, happens whenever required, once in a while, whenever required. Now, continuous research, this type of research continues over a long period of time, and it's conducted on a regular basis. It's continuous research. And by and large, organizations tend to engage in continuous research. They're continuously trying to update their understanding of the market, for example. It's important that they understand the market. It's important that they understand motivations within the market and realize that markets are in almost a perpetual state of change. Customers' requirements are changing, customers are becoming more sophisticated, there's new technology, there's more communications, there's more information about the market. So companies need to keep up to date with this. So there is continuous research. Continuous research is useful when making observations or monitoring behavior or trends within the market. It's extremely useful when making observations or trying to work out trends, because when you work out a trend is over time, and so is continuous research. So a piece of research conducted, let's say today, will give the picture as it is today. But we know there are trends in society, the fashions, people's understanding of products and the use of products and so on. Those change over time. So it's important to have another piece of research later which will pick up the trend. So the later piece compared with the present piece, the piece from today, will indicate the trend. The trend is the consumers are moving away from the product or moving towards the product. We can only determine trends if we have pieces of research conducted in different time periods, because trends happen over time. Continuous research is conducted with the use of respondents or panel members. Information is collected on a regular basis from these panel members. That's probably the easiest way to do it, to ask a set of respondents to participate in the research and to measure their changes, their attitude changes over time, attitudes towards products, towards markets, towards brands, to work out what they're thinking over time. That's probably the easiest way, because then the researchers are working with the same respondents. But it could be done differently. It could be that a sample of the population is investigated in a particular time period, and that sample may be drawn randomly. It's very expensive to do and very complicated, but it could be drawn randomly. And perhaps a sample in a different time period could be drawn randomly and the two sets of results compared. That's another way of doing continuous research. The research question remains the same. It was just that the research was administered in two time periods. But the easiest way to do it is to have a set of respondents or a panel, like I've got on the note here. And then just call in the panel from time to time and ask them some questions and deal with that panel. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Now, ad hoc research. Well, this type of research is referred to as one-off research. It's ad hoc. It's just a one-off. The management of a business have got a question and they need an answer to the question. It could be about the product design or the functionality that is required in the product. It could be some issue of that nature. It's a one-off question. They need to answer the question before they perhaps buy equipment to make the product or tool up to make the product. So this research is designed to address a particular problem. It's a one-off. Marketers use ad hoc research to address solutions to problems. So when a problem arises, it may be a specific problem, in which case a specific response is required, and ad hoc research is used. One-off research, a one-off piece of research is used to try and answer that question. Ad hoc research can include consumer research about a particular product, or employee satisfaction about their new office accommodation. It can be about just about anything related to business. But the point is, it's a one-off. It answers a particular question, a question which is important to the management. It's important to know the answer because that will enable them to make a better decision. But they need that question answered, so it's a one-off approach. Now, the types of data can be classed as quantitative research or qualitative research. So we have a dichotomy here. We have a split between quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative, as the name suggests, deals with numbers, deals with measurable quantities, measurable outcomes. Qualitative research deals with opinions and attitudes. It's also very important. Sometimes researchers tend to almost look down on qualitative research because it doesn't seem as scientific or as robust as quantitative research. However, it is extremely important because the organization, a company for example, is dealing with customers, and customers or consumers, they've got attitudes and opinions, and that's what's important. What's their attitude or opinion about a product? So qualitative research is very important, but there is quantitative and qualitative, and let's look at these. Start with quantitative. Well, quantitative research involves collecting large samples of research and presenting the findings numerically in graphs and charts, for example. It could use all sorts of sophisticated techniques, multiple regression techniques or curvilinear regression techniques, or it can use all sorts of sophisticated statistical techniques. Many of these are nowadays easily performed by computers using standard statistical packages. One of the big statistical packages is known as SPSS, the Statistical Package for the Social Sciences. And that particular package is capable of incredibly sophisticated calculations. So in this case, the researcher would collect information, collect data. It becomes information later. The researcher collects data, and the data is, generally speaking, quantitative data. And this quantitative data could be if the price was this much, how many items would you purchase? If the price was that much, how many would you purchase? It's quantitative. But there's all sorts of quantitative data the researcher may use. And some of this may be secondary data. It may be published by the government and made freely available, or published by chartered institutes, Chartered Institute of Marketing or Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply, or one of the accountancy institutes. And generally speaking, these institutes try to be as helpful as possible and make data available. And they do so free of charge, a lot of it. So it's in the public domain. Researchers can access this if they know where to look, and then use this to get some insight into the market and present their findings using graphs and charts and so on, and present this to management, who can then make decisions based on this quantitative research. It could be quantitative research is collected through census. Now a census means, in this case, looking at every individual in the market. Every individual. When everybody is counted up, that's a census. Sometimes we think of the census as conducted by the government about the population, which is conducted every so often. That counts up everyone in the country. Well, a census in statistics means when everyone who is relevant to the study is investigated. When everyone's investigated, or everything's investigated that's relevant, that's called a census. That takes in the whole population. It could be sample surveys, could be interviews, could be questionnaires. But it's quantitative. It's measurable. And the results are in number formats. So the process of collecting the data is structured and standardized. Quantitative data is useful for measuring, quantifying, validating and testing hypotheses. A hypothesis it's like a conjecture. It's like what we would call probably a theory. We would say something is related to something else. That's my hypothesis. I believe that A is related to B. That's my hypothesis. Now, is A related to B? Well, let's collect some data. We collect data about B and collect data about A, and we do an analysis, and we find statistically they are connected. So we say, well, okay, the hypothesis was borne out, so there is some sort of relationship. We have to be very circumspect about it, because it may be there is a relationship, but it's transient. Maybe if we conducted the research next week, we'd find a different result. It depends. So we have to use common sense, and we have to be careful about interpreting our results. But we look at a hypothesis. A hypothesis is we postulate some relationship, and then we try to test that relationship. In the example I just gave you, I postulated a relationship that A was related to B, and I conducted a statistical test, let's say. If I conducted the same test again in a month's time, I might find a different result. But we just have to be careful about how we interpret the results. Quantitative research does have some limitations compared with qualitative research, I should say. There are limitations. Quantitative research is not so flexible. Respondents are restricted to the responses they provide. They are not able to freely provide detailed answers to interview questions. Sometimes when this type of research is conducted, say conducted talking to people about their behavior, let's say in the marketplace, we may present them with how often do you buy this product? Is it once a day, once a week, once a month? Well, what if they buy it twice a week? What if they buy it every 2 months? Now they buy the product, but we haven't got a response to that. We didn't enable them to accurately say what their behavior is. We have restricted them. We've restricted them so we can tick our box. We've got a number of boxes we can tick. These are numerical boxes, boxes from which we have classified the answer. But perhaps in the design of the questionnaire we haven't picked up that there may be other responses. And this is why sometimes questionnaires need good pilot surveys. Pilot survey is to iron out problems like this, to try and recognize that the design of the questionnaire, let's say, is bad. It's missing parts, or it's badly designed. It needs to be restructured to allow customers to give the response and to capture that response accurately. Closed questions do not allow respondents to provide detailed answers. Closed questions is when we give the respondent a number of possible answers and they tick the one that's most appropriate. But that may not pick up the strength of the preference, or it may not pick up precisely what the respondents want to say. Open-ended questions enables the respondents to explain what they do or what they feel about the market, or how many times they buy it, or gives more detail. But open-ended questions are very difficult to code at the end, and if they're difficult to code, the price goes up. It's open to the interpretation of the coder before the information or the data, I keep saying information, the data is analyzed before it's turned into information. Now, qualitative research. Well, qualitative research involves collecting data from small sample sizes. Generally speaking, it's qualitative. We don't have the luxury normally, or the resources to have very large sample sizes for qualitative research. Qualitative research is looking for feelings and attitudes and opinions, and that is more time consuming to collect. Unlike qualitative research, the focus is on views, opinions, as I said, attitudes, feelings, rather than obtaining numerical data. This is asking for their feelings about a certain product, their feelings about the pricing of the product, their feelings about the usefulness of the product or the image of the product, their perceived quality of the product. It's what they feel. And that makes it different to quantitative research. Quantitative research ended up with numbers. Numbers which could be used to calculate averages and moving averages and so on. This is qualitative. Data can be from interviews, focus groups, in-depth interviews and observations. So a whole variety of sources for this data can be used. It could be a focus group is called together. A number of people are invited to a room or into some sort of setting and invited to give their comments. And they can chat freely about the product. And the researcher simply makes notes of the comments. They don't lead the discussions. They may just prompt the discussion when it starts to fall off to keep it going, but essentially what they're doing is picking up the responses. So the data can be picked up from a number of sources. It could be an interview, as I said, but this interview would be open-ended. Having said that, there are some techniques that are used in qualitative research which attempt to measure the strength of feelings. For example, the Likert scale. Now, this is the subject matter of other videos, and we're not going to go through it here, but the Likert scale will measure the strength of opinion. How much do you like this product? On a scale of 1 to 5, let's say. How much do you like it? Do you like it 4? Or do you like it 1? Or do you like it 2? And the bigger the number, the more they like the product. So there are the use of some scales which look quantitative, even though it's in qualitative research. So there is a little overlap between the two. Qualitative research is focused on description, detail and understanding rather than measurement and numbers. It's the people's feelings, their description of the product, how they see the product, their perceptions of the quality and of the drawbacks of the product and the strengths of the product, and it's what they feel. It's not based on measurements and numbers. The research is about going below the surface and obtaining detailed responses through emotions and feelings. Because this is important, because it's emotions and feelings that determine the sales. It's whether the customers like the product. Well, that's emotional. If they like the product, then they will examine the price. And then they will make a decision, a purchase decision. Is it too expensive? Is it good value? They are evaluating this. And it is inside their heads. This is a psychological process. So there's a lot of strength in the qualitative approach. The trouble with it is its expense and its complexity. So the aim of qualitative research is to address the what and the why people. What do they want, and why do they react in a certain way? What do they want from the product? What products do they want, and what do they want of the product, and why do they respond in particular ways? And that is the reason why we have qualitative research. Now back to sources of data. Well, sources of data can be also primary research or secondary research. I've mentioned these earlier. Well, these are two big divisions in the type of data that we can collect. Primary research, well, this is first-hand research conducted to address a problem. The data is collected is only used for the purpose of the research objectives. This is when a company wants, let's say a company or a research institution or the government or whoever, let's say a company wants a particular piece of research conducted. They want to know exactly about their product in a particular market. A very specific research question. Something to do with their product in a particular market. Now that requires primary research. That's first-hand research. The researchers go out and inquire into that particular product in that particular market and come back with answers. So the research has a purpose and it has set research objectives, and it's done for that purpose, and that's the original purpose and probably the only purpose for that research. Data is not available prior to the research question. There is nothing available. There's no other source of information or data. There's been no analysis in the past. No data was collected in the past and processed into information and made available. It doesn't exist. So the need to collect data arises due to the research objective. The company wants to know something about its product in a particular market, let's say. There's no other data available. So it must collect the data to answer that question. That's primary research. It's to address that particular question. It can be exploratory, descriptive, or it could be causal. It could also be qualitative or quantitative. So the precise format of the primary research and the type of research that's conducted, well, that may vary. It could be qualitative, for example. They could go out and ask opinions. It's still primary research. It's conducted to address a specific question that perhaps is posed by the company. So it is qualitative, but it's primary. Or it could be quantitative. It could go out and collect data in a particular market. How many items were sold, what the particular price, and how many shops sold how many and at what prices. That's quantitative. It's collecting data. It's collecting numerical data. It's still primary research. Data collected for primary research is designed to address a specific problem. It's aimed at solving a particular problem, answering a particular question. And data collection techniques can be used. For example, observation. That's primary. It could be primary. It goes out to answer a particular question. How do customers see a new product that's put into a shop? How do they react to it? Probably the best way to gauge that is by making observations, by having a trained observer making the observations and accurately recording what happens. That could be, but it's primary research. It's answering a specific question. Primary research could be experiments, although this is mostly related to the natural sciences. But sometimes there may be limited opportunities on the part of companies to try to gauge responses by having a spot sale, for example, of a product where they drastically cut the price and see what the uptake is as a result. Or they may reposition the product in the shop to see what the response of the customers are to that. They are, in a sense, performing experiments. It could be a focus group, inviting a group of people in to answer a specific question. Again, primary research. The mystery shopper, the shopper who is unknown to the staff in the shop, but goes round and makes observations about the layout or about the treatment of customers or the customer care, and who feeds this back. It's primary research. It's answering a specific question. It could be an interview, interviewing people to try and get specific insights into a particular problem, getting their responses to a particular problem. Primary research. That information is not available from any other source. Or it could be questionnaires or surveys. Again, primary. Trying to ascertain answers to specific questions. And this research is not being conducted elsewhere. Now, secondary research, well, this is often referred to as desk research. It is research that you collect through secondary sources like unlike primary resources, which are collected first-hand. So primary is first-hand research, going out trying to get specific answers to specific questions. This research has not conducted before. But with secondary research, it's like desk research. The researcher is able to access sources of data which are perhaps in the public domain, or sources of data that the organization have purchased, which were previously collected by research institutes, let's say, but now the data is sold to the company and they're able to analyze the data and process the data. That's secondary research. The data was not collected for the benefit of the company. The data was collected with a general view to sell to anyone who wishes to buy it, or to be made available to anybody who wishes to access it. Secondary research is available information and used for reviewing, assessing suitability, reliability and validity. So secondary research was undertaken on a very general level, and now it's made available to researchers in more specific areas. But the researchers who use it did not originally collect the data. That was collected by someone else. So it's secondary. Someone collected the data for a start and then others used it. That's secondary. Secondary information can be used to develop research objectives, perhaps learning from prior information and looking at prior data which was processed into information, and using the information for their own research. So sometimes, say, marketing companies may publish findings of research into particular trends or particular emerging trends, and other companies may be able to use that information for their own purposes. That's secondary information. They did not collect it. It was collected by another organization but used by them. Secondary research, well, these the sources could include books, journals and articles. They were always good for published data, data regarding particular topics. The internet, websites and blogs, information and data is often presented in those. It's a question really of knowing where to look for secondary research. The researcher should have a skill in being able to know where to go to try and pick up this data and information. Government statistics. The government publishes an enormous amount of statistics on all sorts of issues, social issues, economic issues and so on, and researchers may use this. They're using secondary sources, the information and the data collected by the government. Well, normally it's dated. The government doesn't, generally speaking, do an awful lot of processing into information. They present the data in publications. But that data was collected by the government. It's just that others may use it for their own particular purpose. Secondary research, in other words. But other sources could be company reports and company records. These reports and records were published or made available for specific purposes. Now they can be used for something else, used in a secondary sense. In-house information conducted by organizations. It could be internal to the organization. They look at their own data they used in the past, and perhaps were able to use it again. Data they collected in the past, which at that time was primary, now they're able to use it a second time. It's secondary research. It could be information from competitors or about competitors. Perhaps sometimes competitors may make information or data available, make information about their strategy available, or make data about their their sales or their market share, and that could be used in secondary research. Statistics from previous sales records and customer relations management, feedback from customer relations management teams. This was data collected by CRM teams about particular issues. But now that data can be used for some other purpose within the organization to provide another insight. But it's secondary. It wasn't collected for the purpose of the next piece of research, so it is secondary. Now, the method used for collecting data. Well, data can be collected with the use of different techniques. For example, interviews. Well, data can be collected through interviews. That's fairly obvious. Group discussions or focus groups, as I've mentioned before. That's a good source of data. Questionnaires, going into the community perhaps and asking people. Of course, there is a problem about selecting who's going to answer the questionnaires. The sample selection is a big issue and may lead to all sorts of distortions and may make the data very suspect or even unreliable. But as a source of data, questionnaires could be used. Care has to be taken about the selection of who's going to participate. Surveys, general surveys, observations, often seen as very weak form of data because it's felt to be a little too subjective. But if the observer is carefully trained and is aware of some of the issues, observation can be a good source of data. Mystery shopper, as I said, sometimes people act out roles which are meant to almost deceive the others. So mystery shopper is not really a shopper. They are there with the purpose of observing what's happening within the, let's say, the shop or the organization, and reporting back. Now the interview, well, interviews are a research technique used to collect qualitative and quantitative data. It depends on how the interview is structured. It could be that the interviewer asks for quantitative data and asks the person to select from amongst different sources of data which one's most appropriate under certain conditions. It could also be qualitative. What's the feeling of the person regarding some particular issue? They can be face-to-face or over the telephone or postal questionnaires. The problem here is that the response rate may be entirely different. Over the telephone, this could be seen as a spam call, an unwelcomed intrusion into people's privacy. So there may be some aggression about the use of telephone, and which may in fact alienate the customer from the organization. Far from gaining a customer, the organization may develop a bad reputation because they've have intruded into these people's homes and without being invited, perhaps. So a telephone interview may not be that welcome. If it's pre-arranged and it's agreed to, then that's fine. But if it just out of the blue, it's an auto dialer dials the number, then that may generate bad feelings. Postal questionnaires may not be responded to. People think they've got limited hours in the day, they want to enjoy life, they don't want to sit there answering postal questionnaires. So the response rate may be very low. But face-to-face, that is one where people may respond because they're confronted by another human being and they interact. Interviews are a good technique for data collection as they achieve high response rates. So interviews tend to have a good response rate. Sometimes people like to be interviewed, like to have their opinions taken into account. But of course, it depends on the length of the interview, how long it's going to take, the environment in which the interview is taking place. If it's a cold day and they're standing outside, if it's a noisy environment, if the atmosphere is somewhat polluted, or it depends. It depends on the context. Fully structured interviews. Well, this form of interview is fully structured and designed with predetermined questions. In other words, the interviewer is well prepared. The questions have been piloted. The wording of the questions is precise and clear. This is a well-organized interview. All the respondents who take part in research should have the same questions and in the same order, so that there is some consistency in the activity, and it's possible to look across all of the responses and realize that the questions happened in the same order and they got the same questions, the same words were used. So it's important that the interviewer is briefed on how to conduct the interview. Fully structured interviews are useful for collecting quantitative data. Sometimes it's difficult to collect quantitative data in interview situations, so the interviewer has to have particular skills and be able to allay people's fears. They certainly don't want to be able to put the respondent into the position of having to do calculations. That may be embarrassing. But at the same time, they should understand what the outcomes are from the questions and be able to clearly pick the appropriate responses. The main limitation of fully structured interviews is that they restrict the response from participants. For example, closed and multiple choice questions. Well, multiple choice questions, let's say there is the question and there is 4 responses. But let's say none of the responses precisely reflect the respondent's desired answer. Then what happens in that case? Well, what normally happens with multiple choice questions is the question will have perhaps 4 responses, and it will have a 5th one which says none of the above or all of the above. But it's restricting the respondent. The respondent may want to explain some situations where the response may be appropriate or inappropriate, or may want to add some detail. So what's given is not very accurate. The respondent wants to clarify, perhaps, but don't have the opportunity in this fully structured setting. Semi-structured interviews, well, they contain elements of closed and open questions. They're semi-structured, so there might be closed questions, but some questions, because of the nature of the question, they're left open. It allows the participants the choice to answer questions in detail and does not restrict the response. Open questions, the respondent simply gives their opinion or gives the facts as they see it, and they're not restricted. Semi-structured interviews allow the interviewer to ask probing questions. The respondent can provide detailed answers. With an open question, the interviewer poses the question and the respondent makes a reply, and it could be that in the process of making the reply they say something of particular interest, so the interviewer is able to probe that by asking a supplementary question, related supplementary question, which just gets a bit deeper and brings out some other issues that the respondent perhaps otherwise would not have made known. Unstructured interviews. Well, this type of interview collects qualitative data. It's not structured. It's just looking at wide situations, and it's a very open format. The questions are open-ended, and it's a very loosely organized, if that's not a contradiction in terms, a very loosely organized procedure. There are some guidelines for the interviewer, some areas that should be mentioned, which will help the respondent to perhaps focus in on those elements and make some comments about them, but it's not very constraining. The interview is focused on topic areas to discuss rather than competing or completing perhaps a set of questions. So they're just broad areas, and the respondent makes comments about those broad areas. It's unstructured. The participant is free to discuss and elaborate on views, opinions and ideas. It's a very luxurious system in that sense, because the respondent is able to give opinions and able to clarify what he or she thinks about situations, and they're able to discuss and elaborate on their views. Now, group discussions and focus groups. Well, group discussions, also known as focus groups, are research techniques that collect qualitative data. So in this situation, a group of people, let's say, are invited to attend a hotel or attend a company and go to an office, and there is a facilitator who will guide the discussion, and the facilitator will record, or it may be videoed in fact, but they will record and make notes about particular ideas and get people to discuss particular ideas and perhaps debate with each other the merits and demerits of particular courses of action. A group discussion will include a group of respondents who are invited to take part in a discussion or topic of interest. For example, product satisfaction or new product development. So companies can use it, and it's advisable for companies to use it, to try and invite a focus group to the company to give opinions about a proposed new product. The company may be about to spend a lot of resources in developing a new product, making a significant investment in time, resource, capital, work time in developing a new product. So it's preferable for them to get the opinions of customers through focus groups in advance of making that expenditure, to see what their focus group have to say, and to expect honest, open discussion about this, and then the management can make a decision. Group discussions are usually led by a moderator who starts the discussion. This moderator, or the facilitator, sometimes known, will start the discussion and will just pick up on key points and make notes about the key points and perhaps look for elaboration about the key points and keep the discussion going and keep the group interested and trying to get a wide variety of opinion from the group. Unlike interviews, group discussions are cheaper to organise and conduct, and qualitative data can easily be collected. With interviews, it's one-to-one, and a large number may have to be interviewed. With a group discussion, perhaps one session with 20 people, perhaps 15 people, whatever, one session with a facilitator or a moderator, and that may yield a lot of insights. So it's a more efficient way of collecting qualitative data. Large amounts of information or data can be collected from one focus group meeting. Sometimes I use the word information in this case it may be appropriate, because sometimes in the focus group they present their data, but they can also analyze the data and come up with what they consider to be information that they're imparting to the organization about their feelings about the product or about the proposal. So they're not just giving the data, but they might be giving some analysis as well. Respondents are able to freely discuss their views, opinions and experiences with members of a focus group. It's a non-threatening environment. It's meant to be a pleasant experience. They're relaxed. They may be treated to some hospitality by the company, and they feel at ease and relaxed, and they get to know each other, and they make opinions, and they make their opinions known, and they debate their opinions, and the moderator is there to ensure that it's going in particular directions. It's leading to outcomes. The moderator pursues the points gently by asking probing questions and moving around the group looking for different responses. Focus groups are effective as they allow the moderator to observe a group of people and their behavior. So focus groups are very useful. The moderator can make observations as well about the group. So it's not just the group making observations about a product, let's say, it's the moderator making observations about the group. And the moderator's view about the group is the enthusiasm they perhaps shown in the whole exercise, the reticence they had, the confusions they had, the misinterpretations, the issues that arose during the whole exercise. It's not as intimidating as face-to-face interviews, as everyone in the group discusses a common interest. Face-to-face, sometimes the interviewee may feel intimidated, and sometimes they may not fully understand the questions, but they're afraid to ask, or they're embarrassed to ask. So there could be issues about face-to-face interviews, but in group situations it's more relaxed, and it's meant to be in that format. However, a focus group, more confident participants can lead the group and influence individuals' views and opinions. So it can be biased. Within groups, leaders can emerge, or more vocal members can emerge, and stronger speakers or more articulate speakers can emerge, and they can intimidate the others into agreeing. So the moderator must be careful to ensure that everyone gets a hearing, and that the opinions of all are taken into account and recorded. Not just the more vocal or the more articulate or the more forceful members. So that sort of bias should be corrected. With observation, well, observation is a useful technique when research involves observing customer behavior and attitudes, for example. Looking at customers, looking at a product, or trying to decide whether to purchase or not to purchase, and looking at how they go about this and what their attitudes are. Perhaps they look at the product and walk away and return and think about it, and what is it that's the blockage? What's causing them not to purchase immediately? Is it the price? Is it the design? Is there something the matter? Observation is an effective method if respondents are unaware that they're being observed. If they're aware that they're being observed, their behavior may change. Sometimes people want to please the observer. Sometimes they don't want to please the observer. They might be annoyed about being observed. So it's best that they are not aware that they're being observed. Mystery shoppers are a technique when marketers observe customer behavior in their stores, for example, and employee behavior in dealing with the customers. So the mystery shopper is looking at the employees in, let's say, a store and their interactions with customers and trying to determine whether the employees need more training or what were the issues and how were they dealt with. Questionnaires and survey. Well, questionnaires and surveys are good techniques for collecting qualitative and quantitative data. So questionnaires and surveys can collect both types. Questionnaires can collect quantitative data as well as qualitative. Questionnaires and surveys are only successful if they are designed keeping in mind the research objectives. So it's imperative, it's absolutely crucial that the questionnaires and surveys know what the research objectives are, and that's the focus of the activity. Ideally, the whole exercise should be kept short. It should focus in on the research objectives and try to deal with these efficiently. If the questionnaires and surveys are long, drawn-out exercises, the respondents will get bored or start to give answers which are not fully thought out because they're drifting away. They're losing interest. So it's imperative that the research objectives are dealt with and dealt with efficiently. Questions should be appropriate for the respondents as well. They must be able to complete questionnaires without difficulty. So avoid the use of slang and jargon and technical terms. It should be in understandable language. It's not there to intimidate or embarrass the respondents. It's there to collect answers. Marketers tend to conduct a pilot study before they introduce questionnaires and surveys to the target audience. A pilot study is a very good practice for the real thing, for the main study. The pilot study is meant to iron out problems and issues. The pilot study can improve wordings of questions and the sequence of questions. It can highlight where training for the respondent is required. So pilot surveys are very important in refining the main survey. Questionnaires are a cheap method for collecting data and can reach a wider population. So questionnaires are a cheap method for collecting data. They're not as necessarily as cheap as a focus group, but they may be. The problem with questionnaires is sometimes they're administered one-to-one. If they're handed out, they may not be accurately completed or thought about in any great detail. They have a high response rate if conducted face-to-face or over the telephone. But over the telephone, as I said earlier, that's more and more controversial. If it was agreed with the respondent in advance, that's acceptable. But if it is just a cold call, it's seen as intrusive perhaps, and it's seen as taking time or just butting in on people's lives, then it may have a more hostile reception. Questionnaire design is important, and questions should aim to answer the research question. The research question is the whole focus of the activity. It's the research question that needs to be addressed. Everything else is peripheral. And dealing with the research question efficiently, that's the ideal approach. So questionnaires and surveys should get down to the point as quickly as possible, and therefore keep the number of questions down. The questionnaires ideally should contain a range of open and closed questions, also have multiple choice and scale rating questions. So they should have open and closed questions. It should be, as I said, not intimidating for the respondent. It should feel they're able to give their opinions about questions and also give more factual responses, which could be closed questions, but also have a choice of responses for some, perhaps multiple choice, where appropriate. And again, the pilot survey can indicate which is which and which is best dealt with in these ways. Scale rating questions are the ones I said earlier when it comes to attitudinal questions, where perhaps the researcher is trying to pick up the attitude of the respondent, pick up their opinions, their attitudes or their feelings about certain situations. They may use scales and say, on a scale of 1 to 7 or 1 to 5, how would you rate the following? On a scale of 1 to 7, how would you rate this one as well? And these are known sometimes as Likert, Likert, Likert type questions. They're dealt with in other videos on this course. But the questionnaire should contain a range of open and closed multiple choice and scale rating questions. Just varied, so it's not a boring exercise for the respondent. And the respondent's more likely to cooperate in that situation. Questionnaires and surveys can be conducted in store, face-to-face, online, over the telephone, door-to-door. There's a whole variety of places where the questionnaires and surveys can be conducted. But it's important to look at the nature of the inquiry and find suitable places for the surveys and questionnaires to be administered. Perhaps face-to-face, but is it face-to-face in the open? Perhaps if it's cold and miserable and dark and perhaps about to rain, the respondent may not be that interested. If it's over the telephone, I mentioned the problems there about intrusive calls on unsolicited telephone calls. If it's door to door, people may be working on something or preparing a meal, but they don't want to stand at the door answering questions. So it's important that the right location is selected. A lot of what we said will be ironed out during pilot surveys, and the importance of the pilot survey should not be underestimated. These will give insights into issues about wording, design of the questionnaire, the location for how it's going to be conducted, who will deal with it, what training is required for the interviewer, and so on. So the pilot survey is very important and will give some insight into what is the best approach. Now, I said at the start this is a long class. You'll see from the bottom right hand side I'm on slide 136 out of 137, a long one, so I expect you to have stopped many times, returned to it, made your own notes and padded out your notes. It's an important topic. It's one well worth knowing, and knowing the issues that are involved in this type of exercise. But that's all I'm going to deal with from in this talk, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.